Imagine this. It's 1970. Ireland is on edge, and two of the most powerful men in the country's government are suddenly fired. Not for taking bribes, not for financial fraud, but for allegedly plotting to smuggle weapons into a war zone. The country is stunned. The questions start immediately. Who knew? Who approved it? And how deep does this go? This is the arms crisis, one of the most explosive political scandals in Irish history. And decades later, it still hasn't been fully explained. To understand what happened, you have to go back 1 year earlier to 1969 and to a crisis unfolding just across the border. Northern Ireland was burning. Nationalist families were being forced out of their homes. Neighborhoods were under siege. People were fleeing, streaming across the border into the Republic, desperate for safety. It was a humanitarian emergency, and the Irish government had to respond fast. Taoiseach Jack Lynch set up a cabinet subcommittee to manage relief efforts. Two men were put at the center of it: Charles Haughey, the Minister for Finance, and Neil Blaney, the Minister for Agriculture. A government fund of £100,000 was created to help civilians caught in the violence. Haughey was given sole control over that money. On paper, it was a relief operation, but behind the scenes, something else was taking shape. Both Haughey and Blaney were frustrated. Lynch's approach to the Northern Ireland crisis was cautious, diplomatic, restrained. They wanted something stronger, something bolder, and they weren't hiding it. Blaney, never a man to stay quiet, said publicly that Fianna Fáil had never taken a decision to rule out the use of force if the situation in the north demanded it. That's a sitting government minister openly floating the idea of military action. It caused waves, and behind closed doors, things were moving even faster. In October 1969, a secret meeting took place in Baileyborough, County Cavan. The Northern Citizen Defence Committees, groups formed to protect nationalist neighborhoods, met with IRA officers and an Irish Army intelligence officer named Captain James Kelly. Afterward, Kelly reported directly to Blaney, and Blaney brought him straight to Haughey's house. The suggestion on the table that the Irish government should support the IRA, that armed action might be coming, and that the government should be ready. What followed became the heart of the scandal. Blaney and Kelly allegedly began planning to import weapons from continental Europe. Haughey, controlling the relief fund, reportedly provided the money. He even attempted to arrange customs clearance for the shipment, meaning the guns could enter Ireland without being stopped or searched at the border. Meanwhile, a Republican leader named John Kelly and Haughey's own brother traveled to London to acquire arms. But something had gone wrong. They suspected the plot had been discovered. They came back empty-handed. By April 1970, the Garda Special Branch had gathered enough information to go directly to Taoiseach Jack Lynch. They told him what they knew. And here's where it gets complicated. Lynch did nothing. Not immediately. He sat on the information. It wasn't until the leader of the opposition, Liam Cosgrave, was separately informed and began pressing for answers that Lynch finally moved. On May 6, 1970, Haughey and Blaney were dismissed from cabinet after refusing to resign voluntarily. The shockwaves were immediate. If you're finding this story as gripping as we do, hit that like button. It helps more people find content like this. Kevin Boland, the Minister for Social Welfare, resigned in protest the same day. His argument? That Lynch and most of the cabinet had known about the arms plan all along. That this wasn't a rogue operation. It was something that had been tolerated, if not quietly approved, at the highest levels. The scandal moved to the courts fast. Haughey, Blaney, Captain Kelly, John Kelly, and a Belgian businessman named Albert Lux were all charged. Blaney's charges dropped early. The first trial collapsed due to allegations of bias against the judge. A second trial concluded in October 1970. All remaining defendants were acquitted. But acquittal didn't mean the questions went away. Inside the courtroom, the evidence had directly contradicted itself over and over. Haughey admitted arranging customs clearance for the shipment, but claimed he had no idea it contained weapons. The Minister for Defense, Jim Gibbons, and a senior civil servant named Peter Berry both testified that Haughey knew exactly what was in that shipment. At one point, the judge looked out at the courtroom and said something that cut straight to the heart of it. Either Haughey or Gibbons was committing perjury. One of them was lying under oath. The courts couldn't prove which one, and that question, who was telling the truth, was never fully resolved. The political fallout was enormous. 4 cabinet positions were suddenly empty. A reshuffle followed, and it launched the careers of future leaders, including Desmond O'Malley and Jerry Collins. Inside Fianna Fáil, the party fractured. Haughey's supporters clashed bitterly with Lynch loyalists. The debate over Northern Ireland policy became a fault line that divided the party for years. Blaney eventually broke away entirely, founding his own party, Independent Fianna Fáil, though it rejoined Fianna Fáil years after his death in 1995. And Haughey? He didn't disappear. He rebuilt, slowly, strategically, relentlessly. By 1979, he had succeeded Lynch as party leader. He went on to become Taoiseach. The man who had been fired in disgrace ended up running the country. But the bitterness never left. When Haughey became Taoiseach, Gibbons, the man who had testified against him, was pushed to the sidelines. Years later, the two men got into a physical confrontation inside the Dáil itself, a fistfight between a former and current minister, inside the Irish Parliament. That's how deep the wound ran. For Jack Lynch, the arms crisis became the moment that defined how history would see him. His supporters praised him for acting decisively, for firing powerful ministers who had gone rogue. His critics argued he moved too slowly, that he knew more than he admitted, and that his hesitation nearly allowed a major scandal to bury itself quietly. Both things can be true. Lynch was navigating almost impossible, a humanitarian crisis spilling across his border, a party pulling in different directions, and ministers who believed that caution was the same as cowardice. He held the government together, but the fractures he couldn't fix lasted for decades. And then there were the revelations that came later. State papers released after 1995 showed inconsistencies in the official account. Diaries published in McGill magazine added more questions than answers. The Freedom of Information Act eventually revealed that the state had altered witness statements, specifically to hide evidence that the Minister for Defense had been kept informed of what Captain Kelly was doing.